Today, we're going to work on our interview skills and getting the most out of it, and honestly, not waste your guest's time and not waste your time in this. In this interviewing, you guys probably already know a little bit how to do it, but how to refine, make it better, and take it from okay to good, and from good to better, and from better to amazing to pro. We're gonna try and level up. So you guys are kind of spread out, but what I want to do right now is let you guys discuss among yourselves, without my input, without my involvement. What is it in an interview? What is it that makes a good interview? What is an essential? However, there's a nice comfy chair, and you bring in a stool for them to sit on that has one leg that's wobbly, and you say, you sit there. That says something completely different, kind of behind the scenes. It provides I guess you could say, a value towards your interview. And you want to have a good value. You want to make and encourage that person, the guest, to share, to open dialogue, to back and forth. So, planning, awesome. Way better than the alternative of potentially insulting someone.
One of our things was to have a quiet environment so no distractions.
Okay. Quiet environment. Or a not distracting environment. Love it. Love it. Something simple. Getting back to the things we've covered previously.
Another one we said was engaging and entertaining, like entertaining.
Engaging in what way?
Like staying on topic and a topic that they know a lot about, or.
Okay. Now, why did you also qualify it with engage and entertain? Do you mean for the guest and the interviewer, or do you mean for the person listening?
The person listening.
Okay, okay. So engaging, staying on the topic that you're discussing, and entertaining for the audience. So it kind of ties back into having a goal, being intentional about what you're talking about, but having a little bit better than just the social dialogue. Okay, so what does that look like? What is intentionally being engaging and intentionally being entertaining look at? We'll come back to that. We'll come back to that. If you have something you would like to share.
Yeah, I said to not repeat the questions or reword them in a way, or ask them at the right time.
To not repeat questions.
Yes.
As in you've asked a question, you've got the answer, and you ask the same question again?
Yeah, or reword it if you run out of questions.
Okay, so you'd hate to go over the same material. Okay, so it kind of goes in with planning, having a goal in mind. I might be reading into this a little bit, but prepping your questions. And that also ties into engagement. Okay, prepping questions so we don't, and prepping yourself. Anything we want to add to that to clarify? Does this cover what you had said there? We got to work through it.
I said have audio equipment that isn't trash. So if you hear crap on the console, maybe it's too distracting.
Okay. You're jumping ahead to tomorrow, but I like where you're thinking. So, and it gets into planning. But it's nice to have that little bit of confidence where you know when you say it's time to record with your gear, that you know it's running. And you're able to focus with your guests rather than worry about the equipment, the box, the computer, the Chromebook, whatever it is Know your gear. I would say that knowing your gear, even if it's not the best, newest, amazingest gear, if you're comfortable with it, that can be a huge thing towards comfortability and planning. Silly little thing to think about, but I think worthwhile. Good. I was not expecting that. Sid.
I said choose the guest food.
Choose a good guest. There's bad guests?
There can
What do you, worst case scenario? What would that look like?
maybe someone who's very quiet and rude, or like they answer each question with like a sentence, and that's it. Something like that.
So there are definitely more talkative people out there, and there are people who are back and forth. What if you do get into a scenario, because you can help a guest be a good guest. You can help them along and give them that courtesy. What are some things that you can do as interviewers to get your guests talking? Jack. You can ask them to elaborate. Ask them to expand. Instead of re-asking the same question, you can say, well, what did you mean by that? Heck, even here when I'm talking to you guys, to further dive into your thoughts, could you clarify that for me? I think that's good. Well, how could we say that?
Go in depth without going off topic.
Go in depth without going off topic. So related to what we were saying there with Jagger, that you can prompt them and get them to be more talkative, but you can also dive down deep. Maybe you discover something that they have a tie with some form of media, and you can go. Great example. Don't be afraid to do that. So just because it's a little bit low, I'm going to go over here. I think the camera can still see me. So you do want to be able to allow yourself in an interview to dive into topics. I would go so far as to say that you want to be structured, but also give yourself the freedom of having a little bit of free form of, let's pause on asking questions and let's just discuss the one point you brought up. So it's a balance in an interview of what you structured and what you prepared for, and also during the interview, for those topics that you came across that were unexpected, that were unusual or unique to your guests, to give yourself time and permission to discuss that topic, just like in any regular conversation. We brought up last class, if you're asking people discussions and conversations, and you're going through your formal list of prepared questions, and all of a sudden, Peyton brings up that he has a monkey, are you just going to move on from that? Or are you going to say, like, well, that was weird. Let's discuss that a little bit more. I would hope that in your interview, that you're not so rigid in, I must get through all of these questions, that you don't take time to explore the monkey. Whatever the monkey is. So, balance between formal and free form. let's take a look at that. Is there anything that we're kind of missing here?
We said to go over the questions with your guests before, so they know what they're gonna say while in the interview. They're not caught off guard.
That could be really advantageous, yeah. That could be really advantageous. Did everybody hear that? A lot of times, in certain institutions, they ask for a list of questions ahead of time, so they can feel prepared in answering them. Understandable so.
I think I would argue that I was always taught to resist that
Yeah.
request when possible. Obviously, there are certain people in certain times that it's not negotiable. The risk you run with giving someone a list of every single one of your questions is that the answers you get are not going to be as authentic because they're not in the moment. They've scripted them, they've decided already what do I want to say, what do I not want to say. Now, in this situation, it's probably less important because it's a topic that's not really a big deal.
Right.
However, you don't want to back yourself into a corner where they expect it to go one way because you said it was going to go that way, and all of a sudden another question pops in your head that you want to ask, but it wasn't on that list, and now they're resistant maybe to asking that question because or answering that question because they feel like you've sprung it on them.
Yeah. In getting into the more journalism side, I agree 100%. It kills spontaneity. It kills the ability to talk about that monkey. It can really pull the life and soul out of an interview.
Now that doesn't mean you can't
Yeah.
say like, here's generally like the direction I'm going, here's some of the ideas I'd like to discuss. So they still have a heads up, but you've not
Right.
pigeonholed yourself into a corner.
Another great option, especially in social interviews like this, in less superstructured formal governmental style interviews, is to do what I call is the pre-interview, to discuss with someone, without getting too much into details, to discuss with someone kind of the broad strokes of what you intend on talking about. Normally that's a polite way of giving people a heads up without pulling the spontaneity, the liveness of a genuine conversation happening back and forth. Use the tools to your advantage. Okay, Jackie, did you have something else you wanted to?
Just sort of similar to that, instead of like asking or telling them what to ask them, I would say that you ask them if there's anything you don't want to ask them.
That's polite and courteous. That is polite and courteous. Okay, so I'm going to lump that in with a bit of
And we're quickly approaching that 15 minutes.
We are.
mark.
shared views. And I'm just going to quickly call that off topic, something you don't wish to discuss. Okay. Last thing that I wanted to bring up that you guys brought here is the engage part. How do you show your guests that you're listening? How do you engage? Jen? Eye contact. Eye contact. What's another one?
Like nodding.
Nodding. So gestures, posture. And then there's the last one that I want to give you guys a bit of a warning on. For audio recordings, it could be easy for you.
Follow-up questions?
Follow-up questions, awesome. The last one I wanted to give you guys a warning on, just for time-wise, is if you're doing an audio recording and you verbally affirm what they were saying, even if you agree, if you're adding to what they're saying, if Natalie's talking and I say, yep, oh, I have something just like that, and I'm talking at the same time, what does that do to the recording? It can be troublesome to listen to, because the microphone might be picking me up a little bit easier than her. So try to refrain from that for this project. So we got eye contact, we got gesture, we got follow-up. The one that I want to point out in gesturing, it gets back to giving the guest in comfort and giving them your attention and actively listening. If I'm going to interview Natalie and I'm like this, that's a much different interview than if I'm like this, interviewing. Just something to notice. That here I'm kind of saying, I look forward to what you're saying. Say it. I'm ready. Whereas if this doesn't, especially if I close my eyes, it's not as nice for you. It's not as nice for you. That's a pretty good list, guys. So at this point, we wanted to model for you an example interview. Would you still like me to interview you?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll be interviewing Mrs. Mason. For those of you who don't know, she actually has quite the education in media and a little bit different perspective, even though her and I are similar in our age and life experience. Her life is not anything at all like mine, and vice versa. And so she's actually going to be a great interview for probably a different reason than a lot of the people that you interview. So for this, we have our comfortable seats, and just to show you guys when we're talking back and forth, and to share with you normally what's just in my head dialogue, what's in my head me thinking. When I'm interviewing, I'll be seated. I'll be addressing Mrs. Mason. But when I'm sharing my thoughts and kind of what I'm thinking through, I'll try and stand up or physically signal to you guys that when I'm behind the chair, that's when I'm sharing. Does that make sense? So, interview when I'm seated. You guys got that. We good to go?
Yep.
Cool. So.
Ooh, we feel very close. Okay.
Hello, Mrs. Mason. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. So today, I wanted to talk to you because I think you have a unique perspective about media. Before we get going, if there's ever a question or anything like that that you're not quite sure how to answer or you're not comfortable with, just let me know. We can easily move on from that. Very good. Would you be so kind? I know from our pre-discussions that you have quite the education in media, but just so I don't miss anything, would you explain for our audience a bit of your history?
So I've kind of dabbled, I guess, in a lot of different areas of media, perspectives on media. So I started out at IU as a journalism major with a focus on writing. So I wanted to be that big name writer at the New York Times, or whatever it might be. And I lived under that goal probably about a week at IU. And then I actually, touring the newsroom, walked through kind of like the writer's bullpen where all the writers were at. And then they took us into the room where they did the layout for the newspaper, so all the, anything graphic, laying out photos and text. And I kind of fell in love with that. So I started working towards that. That was kind of my declared focus. Taking graphics classes, I started working for the paper. So from 5 days a week, from 10 p.m. until 1 a.m., I was working on the staff, laying out the paper, and
Why 10 p.m. till 1 a.m.?
because we have to wait for the writers to do their job first. So they had to finish their writing, it had to be edited multiple times, and then when they were done, everything came to us to then lay out on the
For
paper.
the morning.
For it to go to the printer at 1 a.m., and then the printer would print them all, and it would be distributed the next day.
Okay, something I didn't even think
Yeah.
about, that they do their work and then the next step happens, which
Yeah.
is why you're working through midnight. Okay, please continue. So you changed gears from being a writer in the bullpen to focusing more on the visual graphics.
So I liked that. I did that for a year and a half, maybe 2 years, and I was starting to realize that I just didn't love it enough to consider doing it all day, every day for forever. So I contacted my high school journalism teacher and kind of confided in her. I'm 2 years in and don't think this is what I want to do, and ended up actually under her advisement changing to education. So half of my undergraduate credits are in journalism, and half of them are in education. So I'm an education major according to my degree. If I had stayed one more semester, I would have been a double major, and I would have had both a journalism degree and an education degree. So, yeah.
So as of this point, guys, in our interview, I'd known a little bit of history, but I've discovered some things. So I was planning on, honestly, talking about background and kind of establishing credibility of my guest. Who is this person that I'm talking to for our audience, to explain who's talking? Establishing a background, some points, some credibility, and then ultimately, if you were writing a paper, you would draw a conclusion. We've gotten into some history, though, that I wasn't expecting. And so I'm going to put a pin in what my formal presentation was and branch off into something that we brought up very briefly. And go from there in the interview. So I'm pausing there and I'm starting up a new branch of conversation just to see what happens. The little slips of paper we didn't prompt you guys, but if you see things that we're doing for the interviews, both on this list and what you're observing, jot little notes down of what you've noticed.
You guys are looking a little bit more at the process of what's happening, not necessarily the content. You can take notes about the so interesting things I say, but we're looking more at the process of the interview.
So, Mrs. Mason, you went from writing, you thought that was your future, you got more into the graphics side, kind of falling in love with that. But you touched base, you actually went back to a mentor of yours, is what I'm surmising here. And you had a change of heart that got you back into education. What did that lead to?
So obviously it ended with me, I was initially licensed and wanted to teach journalism, so yearbook, newspaper, radio, TV, all of that. And that's what I graduated with. That was my goal. I did student teaching in a huge student media program in southern Indiana, and then couldn't find a job. There are just less and less student media programs at the high school level. They're few and far between anymore. And so I ended up getting a job teaching English, and did that for 5 or 6 years. And when I came here, I was kind of at a point where it was, you know, do I get a master's degree? Is that really necessary? And it turned out that, and this sounds horrible, but the sole reason that I finally decided to go back and get my master's degree is it pays more. So the district said, you've got 13 months before we do away with that. We're not going to give the pay bump anymore. And that was kind of the kick in the butt that I needed to go back and get my master's. So my master's isn't in journalism, it's in education, but it focuses on, it's a master's in learning and technology. So how does the use of technology and media in the classroom affect student learning? So it's still kind of related, but also a different branch, different direction.
And so today, coming here, knowing this little bit about you before and having a focus in education, but also technology, what have we seen in the last evolution of education? What have we seen?
So I think obviously access is huge, one-to-one devices, and these guys see it, but it's not every district. So like my daughter's district is not even close to one-to-one. So it's not like everybody's there, but there are so many more people there than there used to be.
And when you say one-to-one, you mean each student having one device, one computer, one Chromebook,
Yep.
whatever it may be, of having that tech in the student's hand.
Yep, and it's even more rare to have it in their hands 24/7. Some schools do it where they have the device during the day, but they can't take it home. So there's different variations of it, but it's way, way, way more prominent than it used to be. I mean, when I was in high school, we didn't even have phones.
Right.
You know, you actually still had a computer class where you went to the computer lab, and that was when you had computer time. So I think that's one of the biggest evolutions, and I think that's the reason for the degree, right? That degree that I have didn't exist 10 years ago. It wasn't a thing. But now it is, because teachers more and more need help to understand, how do I use technology, not just to say like, here's a computer, use it, but to use it with purpose.
So as schools get more technological and one-to-one becomes more common, what do you see the future as being? What do you think will be the next thing, either in technology or for education itself?
I'll make it quick because it's over time, but I think it's definitely going to be, I don't know that we're going to see more. I don't think it's going to be a quantity thing. I'm at least hoping that it's going to be a little bit more quality, what is best. Because as we're seeing like with the Yonder pouches, you know, more technology isn't always the best direction. It's in how we're using it and when we're choosing to use it and why. So I'm hoping that's the direction it goes rather than just more.
Thank you for joining us today. An interesting perspective for someone who studied it. Media, is it expanding? Yes, but no at the same time. Okay, guys, it's always nice to thank your guest at the end. I hope we learned something from that. Hopefully it informs your own interviews in working through this process.
Okay, hold on to your notes for tomorrow. We will come back to those and see if there's anything you need to add, anything you saw that we can add to our list.